Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude Beyond Mystic, and welcome to this Sunday night deep woo-woo episode of the Wacky Woo Show. Tonight's subtitle is A Psychonaut's Journey, and with me, of course, is the one and only Jay WEIDNER. He is, of course, the writer and producer of A Clockwork Shining, as well as the JFKX Solving the Crime of the Century, and he's the author, of course, of The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Henday. You can find his book here on Amazon. Jay, welcome back to the show. How are you, man?
Hey, it's great. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Excited to have you on. And just today, I saw the video you produced with your the director here of these films, Ryder Lee, and you guys have been decoding this Exorcist movie, and I completely fell off of my chair what you guys discovered. So I want to get into that maybe here in the first 10 minutes before we get into the psychedelics talk this evening. Of course, you and I had done a decode of your amazing movie here last November, and it was fascinating also all the information that you guys have brought out on how Stanley Kubrick was connected to all of this stuff, the MK Ultra, of course, the moon landings, 2001 Space Odyssey, and how he was painting a very, very bleak picture, coded as it were, as to what's happening behind the scenes in the power structure of humanity. Of course, one of the big culminations of that was Eyes Wide Shut. So, Jay, I have a clip here where Ryder is kind of like surmising here what you found, but explain to the audience member before I play this clip here, and of course I'll bring the link down for the audience members who want to go see the full 1 hour interview here with you and Ryder. But what was so absolutely crazy about this Exorcist movie? What have you found, Jay?
Well, I've actually suspected this for a long time, but a new series is out right now called The Institute, written by Stephen King. And it's all about how the government has a program where they kidnap high IQ children and then torture them, basically, to make them more psychic. And we've now known since about 2015 that this is true, that tortured, abused children have this thing that happens to them where they're opening themselves up to this larger psychic world. And the government has now weaponized that knowledge. And Stephen King does a really good job of showing it in this series. The in The Shining, of course, in the movie The Shining, not the book, little Danny, he doesn't get his psychic powers until after he's abused by his father, Jack. So there's this link. And so then I started thinking about The Exorcist, and a few things about The Exorcist that I want to say. First off, William Peter Blatty, who has intelligence ties, goes out of his way in the movie to show that there could be psychological explanations for Reagan's behavior. The throwing stuff around and all the crazy things that were talking in voices and all of that. And I don't think that we knew in 1973, when all this came out, about the fact that abused children, sexually abused children especially, have these extra abilities. And so my postulate, and Ryder's postulate, is that Reagan is not really possessed by the devil. Reagan has been abused, sexually abused. And she's expressing that in all the actions that she takes, from the things she does with the crucifix and throwing her mom into her private parts, and saying all these weird things that are very sexual in nature, would indicate that Reagan has been abused. So then the question becomes, well, who abused her? And then it comes, well, where's her dad in this? Her mom talks to her dad for about 5 minutes in the movie, and Reagan hears the conversation. And her mom is clearly not happy with her dad, who's missing, who is never informed that there's this problem with his child, that she's going to a Catholic priest, she's going to psychiatrists to solve the problem, and she can't solve it. And she's mystified by what's going on. But she is hostile to him. And then there's the question of, which is really the only murderer. Well, no, there's 2 murderers in the film, but there's the first murder is of her mother's film director. Well, so the scene is her mother and her mother's assistant drive up to their apartment or mansion or condo or whatever it is, and they see a police car with its lights on, a crowd of people, and they kind of wonder what's going on. They come into the house with their groceries, I believe, and they're undoing their groceries. And then one of the film assistants comes in and says, "Did you guys hear?" They say, "No, what?" He says, "Burke was throwing out Reagan's window, and he's got a broken neck right outside your house." Nobody in the entire film, not the police detective, not the priest, not Reagan's mom, not Reagan's mom assistant, nobody ever asked, what the heck is that film director doing in their house with no adults around? And what is he doing up in Reagan's bedroom?
Right.
And the thing is what is he doing in that house? Does he have a key to it? How did he get in there? And it's never asked. Nobody ever asked, and nobody ever wants. And that is to, and also an earlier scene in the movie, that same film director, Burke Dennings, he makes a very, very perverted joke, right? Showing that he's a slime ball, right?
Right.
So, and so these things all kind of go together. And then what I've tried to do in the show and what I'm going to do in the future is I'm tying this movie to generational abuse of my generation from my parents' generation, a completely taboo subject that nobody wants to talk about. But the fact is that my generation had 85 million people in it in the United States. We were the largest generation of all time. Probably never will there ever be a generation that big. And the GIs that fought a two-front war, they came back to an America that was rapidly changing. It was gone from a rural to an urban to electronic television and everything coming in, and also 85 million children surrounding these guys who were all traumatized from fighting in World War II. And I'm saying, and I have evidence, we weren't doing statistics in those days, but I have anecdotal evidence that our generation was extremely abused by our parents' generation. And I think that the reason The Exorcist was one of the biggest film hits of all time, making almost $200 million in 1973, which is unheard of. That'd be like $5 billion today, was the expression of this abuse. And we all knew it and we all felt it. And when we went there, it was like a cathartic release when you saw the film, because there was so much abuse going on. And this was this expression. And then that brings up to mind, is all sexual abuse going back thousands of years perceived as being possessed by the devil, when it's actually you gain telekinetic and telepathic powers through abuse? And so people seeing a very abused person expressing themselves through telekinesis and telepathy would conclude, because they don't know anything, that they're being possessed by the devil. And the church, which is one of the biggest abusers of children, we now know that. And I'm an ex-Catholic, and I saw some of that abuse. I'm telling you that the Catholic Church has got more possession by the devil than anybody else. The Catholic Church also has more sexually abused children than anybody else. And here's another point, which I wanted to make yesterday, but I forgot. One of the things that we know from sexually abused children is that they become very promiscuous when they become adults. We know this is a matter of fact. And there is no doubt about it, the most promiscuous generation of all time were the boomers. They were out to lunch. And William Friedkin, who directed The Exorcist, directed another film about that promiscuity called Cruising with Al Pacino, a really interesting film about the gay scene in the late 70s, of which I lived right on the fringe. I'm not gay, but I lived in San Francisco at that time, and I witnessed the gay scene, and it was incredibly promiscuous. I mean, to the point where it was almost like ridiculous that there was so much promiscuity going on. And I believe this is all a result of a deeply abusive situation that the United States found itself in the 1950s and 60s, which expressed itself in the movie The Exorcist, which is why it made almost $200 million in its first run, which was unheard of. An average film in 1973, a hit film, was 20 million, like My Fair Lady or whatever.
Right.
20 million. Oh my God, that's an amazing amount of money.
Right.
But to make a film for what, $4 million and make almost 200 million off of it in 1971 or $73, amazing. And I believe also that William Friedkin, who was an atheist and Jewish, kind of didn't like the Catholic stuff, especially the last third of the movie, all that ritual stuff. And I think that he emphasized the abuse that was regularly going on to Reagan in the movie. And there's three forms of abuse going on here. First, there's the beginning form of abuse where Reagan, nobody knows what's going on with Reagan. She's psychologically traumatized for some reason. No one knows why. Then her mom, who's wealthy, takes her to these highfalutin psychiatrists and doctors. And the whole middle part of the film is they're testing her. And back in 1973, I almost had a traumatic experience watching Reagan getting tested by the doctors. I'm sitting in the theater. I did not know that, hospitals were like, doing these kinds of things at the time. Yeah. And then the last third of the movie, which Ryder points out, is that she calls in the Catholic priest to exorcise her daughter. And what do the priests do? They tie her up to a bed. They torture her. They do more torture and more torture. And the whole entire movie, outside of the first 20 minutes, is the torture of Reagan.
Right.
And that's what it is. And that's the torture of our generation. Stephen King did an essay on The Exorcist, which was really interesting, a long time ago. And he said that The Exorcist wasn't about the devil, just like I'm saying. The Exorcist was really about the generational warfare that was going on at the time. The boomers were warring against their parents' generation. But no one's ever asked the question, why were the boomers rebelling against the parents' generation? What was going on here? What was the underlying factor? And I'm contending to you that the underlying factor was serial sexual abuse of the baby boom generation. And I can prove that in a number of ways, from Timothy Leary to Hugh Hefner to all members of my parents' generation who were gigantic influencers of my generation. Let's not forget the Beatles, the Stones, Bob Dylan. They were not baby boomers. Leonard Cohen is not a baby boomer. All the great influencers of our generation weren't part of our generation, but they act like they're part of our generation.
Masquerading as, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big scam. And what did the Beatles do? Yes, the Beatles had good music. I'm not going to deny it. But, they brought LSD to my generation. They did. They made it okay. They said, go do it. Take as much as you want. And I regard LSD as a particularly abrasive psychedelic, and you probably shouldn't be taking it. You should be taking something more natural. But anyway, that's my essay on The Exorcist and what it really means.
Most of the people on the show are head blown with what you just said, but that's not the best of it. So there's a correlation there, of course, with the real story from which this story is based on. So let me play a first clip here where Ryder is interviewing you and just surmising that. So we'll play that first clip here for the audience, and then we'll come back and try to break it down. It just gets weirder and weirder, folks. So let me just make sure we get that page correctly here. 4737, I think it was. Hold on. I missed it here. There you go. Okay,
so the little boy that the movie that The Exorcist is based on grew up to be a NASA engineer that helped Apollo 11 spacecraft get to the moon. So Stanley Kubrick was supposed to direct the movie that The Exorcist is based on in real life by a boy who was possessed in 1949 by demons, which we've discussed was more than likely mental illness or sexual abuse, who grew up to be a NASA engineer for the Apollo 11 space shuttle. Kubrick turned it down and then made a movie about abuse, possession, psychic abilities, mind-controlled assassins, government cover-up, and the faking of the moon landing.
That is, I don't even know what to say. That is,
I just watched this earlier too, and I had to replay that. Wait. Run that by me one more time. And also, this guy who was supposedly abused and became a NASA scientist, his career ended in 2001. Like, just to add more insult to injury here of all these connections.
yeah.
So Jay, I mean, you've surmised so many times here that Stanley Kubrick was telling us through his movies a lot of things that were happening behind the scenes. What did you make of this discovery here from Ryder, from where the story originally originated from, and how do you extrapolate that to perhaps where we saw after that the movement of LSD, as you said, in the 70s, and this resurgence now, the popularization of drugs, including now here in Canada and some of the States as well. There seems to be a resurgence of that now, and we're wondering if we are going to be going through this other mass experimental psychosis here for humanity. Where do we go from here, Jay?
Well, yeah, I do worry about that, by the way. And the weaponization of psychedelics is always something I'm worried about. And I know my old friend Terry McKenna, he was always also worried about that. And he used to say that he didn't want everybody to take psychedelics, that you needed to have a discipline before you did it. And he had a whole thing. You need to study history, science, physics, art, all the arts and everything. And then when you've had that kind of education, then you can take the psychedelics in a prescribed manner, which was what he called the heroic dose, which is not that you take psychedelics like 50 times a year. You take psychedelics once a year. Only that one time is like planned out. Everything is you have your keep cool guy in the room outside who, when you start screaming, he opens up the door and says, "Keep cool, guy," and closes the door again. Right?
Trip sitter, yeah.
Yeah, and so psychedelics have to be not used as party tools. They're used as serious psychological elements designed to allow us to do a deep psychological evaluation of ourselves. And that's what they do. And they give us a lot of other benefits too. But, so I think that that we went through this original revolution many thousands of years ago, according to McKenna, which is where Paleolithic man, hungry with an empty stomach, searching in desperation for food, finds a cow pie with some mushrooms growing on it, right? And desperately eats them, not knowing what they really are, but he's just hungry or she's just hungry. And as McKenna always said, you have to take the heroic dose on an empty stomach. And believe me, the difference is amazing. Don't eat food before you do it, because the lack of food makes the impact much more powerful. And so this Paleolithic guy takes the mushrooms and he began seeing geometry and mathematics being expressed visually, and seeing entities and who are giving him real information. And so McKenna's thesis was that this was the beginning of the intelligent primate.
Right.
That the primate moved from just living from second to second to realizing that there's this larger world that he may even have some control over if he exerts control over it. And that is the difference between the Paleolithic primitive man and modern humans. And so today, starting in, I think, 1957, Gordon Wasson, who was a banker in the East Coast and also had intelligence ties, he went to Mexico and he met the shamaness, and she turned him on to magic mushrooms. And he came back and told a reporter for Life magazine, who then put this story out in Life magazine, which then told the world about the rediscovery of the psychedelics. And so, after thousands of years of sobriety for the Western man, of creating technologies and mathematics and language and all these incredible things that we created in the sobriety of losing touch with the magic mushrooms and the psychedelics, which happened about 2,000 years ago. So we went through like 2,000 years of no psychedelics at all in the Western world. And we created this incredible world. And now we're kind of going back into that phantasm of the psychedelics, which are going to be able to make, and I know that Terence thought this because he told me several times, which then we're going to take that technology, that incredible edifice that we've built up through the last 2,000 years, and we're going to psychedelicize it.
Right.
And that's what we're doing right now. That's what computers are. Computers are, all the guys in Silicon Valley were psychedelic guys. And there's a book, I can't remember what it was, but it's a book about all the guys in Silicon Valley in the 80s, doing psychedelics and coming up with different programming ideas and different algorithms and things. And then they said that came from my trip that I took, right? And so that's where I think we are. We're about to become supercharged into this new reality. And I don't really, again, I'm not advocating people take psychedelics. I think people who are incredibly well educated, most likely self-educated, not educated by the system, but autodidactic education. I think that those people are the ones best qualified to take it. And yes, you have to take a heroic dose. That's 5 grams of dried mushrooms on an empty stomach in a dark room by yourself with a friend watching over everything for you. And
let me populate a few things here for you, for the audience here who are pretty new perhaps to this conversation. Yeah. So what Jay's referring to, let me go to a different side of the slide deck here. I've been watching and listening to some of Terence McKenna's speeches and interviews here quite a bit in the last 2 months. I've been very interested and intrigued by it and kind of compelled to go revisit some of this material. I've had heard of him before, but it was lost and forgotten in my memory. And this was sparked a couple of months ago. And in this particular interview, this is a 3-hour-long interview. It's called The Evolutionary Mind Trialogues 1, 2, and 3 with Terence McKenna, Ralph Abraham, and Rupert Sheldrake. Guys, if you want a mind-blowing conversation about reality and the hypothesis of how our minds have evolved, this is the episode for you. And this is what Jay WEIDNER, to some extent, is referring to in what Terence McKenna was opining. He was suggesting that someone around 50,000 years ago, there was this huge evolutionary leap in mankind. And people at first thought that evolutionary leap had something to do with the size of the skull. And he said, no, the size of the skull got bigger way before the evolutionary leap. So he says it wasn't necessarily the size of the skull, perhaps the connectivity of the different areas in the brain. And now he opined that, of course, as Jay was suggesting here, that psychedelics could have had a part in connecting these different sides of the brain, in showing a different aspect of how we view our reality to engage humanity in critical thinking, strategic hunting, imagination, and then language, which created the foundations for the society that we have today. And I thought, whoa, okay, let's revisit that. That's very interesting. And so based on that now, that knowledge, is it possible, Jay, now too, that we are on this cusp, again here through experimentation with psychedelics, as you're saying here, since the 80s, a lot of the programming stuff, the AI we have now, and to some extent, some would argue that in the 50s and 60s, there are guys on psychedelics here coming up with all those crazy cool cars and muscle cars and all those crazy colors and shapes and, the Stingray Corvettes and all that stuff. We haven't seen beautiful cars like that in a long time, that perhaps they were tripping and seeing in a very different way the possibilities outside of our current paradigm. So is it possible here too that those psychedelics are in and of themselves now re-emerging through different channels, through global consciousness? Is it possible that that experiment that the three-letter agencies were going through in the 70s too kicked it off somehow, kicked off the hornet's nest, as you say? We've been sleeping at the switch for a long time and have forgotten about psychedelics, but it's coming back now. Do you think it's by design somehow, or these mechanical elves on the other side kind of screaming at us to go back in and get the information, because we are at this eschaton here, the end of time, as Terence McKenna describes it, and we very much need perhaps an upgrade in our mind here before we completely fuck up the planet? Is this where we're at now, Jay?
Yeah, that is exactly where we're at. And the aliens that we meet in the UFOs and the mechanical elves that we meet in psychedelic experiences, they're telling us the same thing. They're warning us that we're ruining the planet. And the reason that they're warning us is because they're part of this planet and they're worried about it. And so these extra intelligences are now making contact with the human race and begging it to stop what we're doing. I mean, if we understand the plasma universe as well as we now do, we know that there's millions of little plasma entities, plasmoids, that are in our atmosphere. When we blew off the atomic bomb in 1945, we killed millions of those critters, okay? And they got concerned. And then we kept doing the tests all through the 50s and 60s, and they got really concerned. Here's where it gets really interesting. John F. Kennedy initiated the test ban treaty, okay, with Khrushchev. All right. Why did he do that? Well, he had a girlfriend named Mary Pinchot Meyer, and Mary Pinchot Meyer had taken psychedelics in the late 1950s, and she realized that she was a very wealthy Washington socialite, very beautiful, and she realized that we were destroying the world. And she became lover of JFK, and she gave him magic mushrooms and LSD and probably ayahuasca and in the White House. And JFK switched from a pro-war guy to anti-war. He wanted to bring the world peace. And so he initiated the anti-nuclear testing treaty with Khrushchev, and they succeeded. We haven't had an outdoor test ever since then. So the psychedelics are actually re-changing us even back in 1962. And yes, you were right when you insinuated that there were a lot of like engineers and artists that were taking psychedelics long before they got popular. We know that now. And yes, so a lot of the designers and computer programmers were taking psychedelics long before they got popular. And so psychedelics, the resurgence of psychedelics that's going on right now is probably the most important resurgence of all of it, because we now have that technology at our hand. We don't have to develop it anymore. We have it, and when we see what the psychedelics have to teach us, we can then apply that to that technology in a much larger way, which is, I think, is what's going on.
Right. Part of the opinion of Terence McKenna was centered around this language, to where humans develop language, and that catapulted us into society, being able to interact with each other, transmit information and knowledge throughout the generations. And what I've been seeing now in the last couple of months is that this idea of communication could be about to change again. So, and to that respect, we're seeing more and more instances of telepathy among humans. And we've seen a lot of psychics now suggest that this is coming up, and perhaps it's being either engineered or designed that way. But there could be something else here, because when you're under psychedelics, you have this imagery that is transmitting information to you. And so in most of the people's description, including Terence McKenna, he talks about this intricate geometric pattern that seems to be conveying messages. There's also these songs on ayahuasca. I forget the name of it, the Icaras or something like that. I forget how you call them. That people, when they describe them, they don't say, "Oh, wow, that was so amazing to listen to those sounds." It's like, "Wow, that was so lovely, but I think it should have been more blue." Right? So they're connecting their brain in different atmospheres here to perceive information in a different way. And I wanted to play a clip where Terence is explaining this idea of telepathy, what we think telepathy is, and what he thinks telepathy really is, and how psychedelics is perhaps changing us or upgrading us here to this brand new language for humanity. So let me just refresh this clip. I'll see if I can play this one for you guys here. Hold on. This one here.
Originally, the active principle of Banisteriopsis capi was called telepathy. In Theodor Hoch-Grünberg and those people went in there in the early years of the 19th century. They collected samples, took it back to Berlin, and characterized it, called it telepathine. And then it was later realized that the compound had been earlier isolated from pagamen harmala and called harmaline. And the rules of chemical nomenclature give the early discovery precedent. But it was called harmaline because, it was called telepathine because the tribal groups using it seemed to have this extraordinary group-mindedness. This is one of the things that I'm keen to talk about, is the fact that telepathy of a sort we didn't conceive of seems to lie very close to the surface in these states. When I think most people think of telepathy as you hear what I think. That's telepathy. That is not what psychedelic telepathy is. Psychedelic telepathy is you see what I mean. You see what I mean.
Okay. When I heard him say that, my trip with mushrooms suddenly made a lot of sense. I was like, oh my God, he just described the undescribable for me in that particular experience. And I recalled how in the last 5 years of me doing these live shows, and I've explained this on the show many times, to where as I'm talking, I'm doing these interviews, I have these images of geometry in my mind. I don't know where they're coming from. They seems to be downloaded from someplace else. And I kind of translate them, understand them in my native language, which is French. And then I translate them in English. And then I have a conversation about whatever topic just hit my mind. And when I did my first trip here on mushrooms, I was suddenly thrust into this geometric pattern of language. And I felt for the first time, Jay, in my life, like a fish in water, as opposed to now here on Earth being a fish out of water. It made so much sense to me, but at the same time, it was so confusing to try to explain that I've been holding on this information now for 5-6 months to try to make heads or tails of what that experience was all about in the first place. So can you speak to that a little bit here, the geometry, how you perceived it in some of your experiences as a youth, and how perhaps this is something that is organically now being called upon humanity to level up here our understanding and our communication with each other, and perhaps now with other entities that are about to enter the game and the playing field here for humanity. Jay?
Yeah, so one of Terence's favorite essays was Henry Mumm wrote an essay called Mushrooms and Language. Very interesting. I think it's online for free. But anyway, Henry Mumm, he in this essay, he says that psychedelics, and particularly mushrooms, have a voice that talks to you. And I guarantee that's true. And you just have to talk to it and it'll talk to you back. And that this voice is so articulate that it makes the person communicating on the mushrooms more articulate. And I found that to be true. And people that I know that have a deep, serious interest in psychedelics, from Terence to Cliff High to myself, name several other people, are highly articulate. Okay, they have an articulation that seems to be vibrating way above everybody else's. And this is, Henry Mumm says, is a direct result of the mushroom and the way that it communicates with you. And so I had an experience where I acquired some dimethyltryptamine a long time ago, and decided that I was going to do it. And I'd never done it before. And so it's a white powder is very interesting because you don't know that your dimethyltryptamine is done cooking until you hit it with a hammer. And if it sparks, then you know your dimethyltryptamine is ready for action, which means that it's electrical in nature, plasma in nature. And so I took maybe a little bit too much my first time. You have to smoke it. You can't take it orally. So I took it with, I don't know, with some tobacco or something. And I had an unforgettable trip. It only lasted 5 minutes, and it felt like 50 hours. And I came out of it, and I was all altered state and kind of weird and didn't know what was going on. And then I had to go back to my corporate job like the next day, right? So I go back to my corporate job, and I'm sitting in a meeting with, these people in my corporation, and I'm reading their minds, and they're not very happy people. Right. And they're certainly not very happy with me, right? And I'm listening to their thoughts, and I'm seeing them in some ways almost violent with different members of the board or the manager board that we were on, and me, and I was really getting freaked out, and I had to go home. I never left work ever, but I had to go home that day. I was like, oh my God, what's going on? And then I was sitting at home, and I was contemplating what the heck was going on here. And then I got a message on my phone machine to call a friend of mine in another state who was this kind of crazy, wild explorer dude, and very entertaining to talk to. And he had a family, like 6 kids and all this other stuff. So, I waited a little while, and I call him up, and I get his son on the phone. And his son, unfortunately, a year before this, had choked on a peanut and lost the oxygen to his brain and went from 120 IQ to a 60 IQ. Wow. Okay. And he answered the phone. And I said, is your dad there? And in that 1 second, I was inside his brain, this kid who had lost almost all his IQ. And I saw the world as a 60 IQ person sees it. And it was the most terrifying world I've ever witnessed in my whole life. And I hung the phone up. I couldn't take it. And I hung the phone up, and I realized, my God, the ayahuasca, which is telepathy, is what DMT is. And I had this and by the way, I had to like cut my hours at work for like the next week. And finally it wore off, and I wasn't doing it anymore. But for like a week, I could hear everybody's thoughts. I could see what they were meaning, what Terence is saying. It wasn't their thoughts. I actually saw their fantasies against each other, right? And how much they hated each other for the most part in the corporate setting, which I can understand. I don't blame them for that. And so
it's a dog-eat-dog word. Yeah,
it really is. Yeah. And so it really does cause telepathy, which is, I believe, what it wants to happen with the human race right now. It wants us to become telepathic so we can stop this stupid fighting that we're doing.
Telepathy and or also manifestation. I want to get into that too, because Terence McKenna in his talks, and from my experience also, and I'll share a little bit with you guys about my experience. There's these ideas of these mechanical elves, for lack of better terms, these entities, these like little gnomes kind of people who are self-transforming, as Terence calls them. And they're so excited. Look at this. And you're like, oh my God, like everything's jumping at you. And they're creating stuff with sound out of thin air that's just as complicated as them, that eventually creates other stuff. And they're like, you can do this too. Do it. And they're screaming at you, come on, you can do it. And you're like, what the fuck? Do what? I don't know. It's my first time here. Give me a break, So they're teaching you about a creation, I think. And I was just watching a video, serendipitously, of course, a couple of weeks ago. Cliff, I put a video on the laws of assumption, because basically the laws of attraction, on how you manifest your reality by shifting your frequency set to the frequency set of that to which you want to create, right? And then
Yep.
there's rules about that, the proximity, the intensity, and how you create and you manifest in your life. So there are people in this planet that are more adept of that as others. But I realized maybe the mechanical elves are showing us a different version of that. That the laws of attraction could be that 3D version, but they might be starting to show us how to create here as the planet is shifting into perhaps this other dimension or expanded dimension. We too, as humans, will have to change how we manifest reality. And then I'm like, if that's indeed what they're doing, on one hand, helping us create and manifest reality in a different way, and two, also use a hyper extension of language, which is telepathic behavior. Could you imagine how official them today would say, no, 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 fuck, we don't want any of that. We're going to lose complete control of this shit show, right? So,
Yep.
so on the two fronts there, the telepathy, I think you and I are on the same page. What do you make of these mechanical elves here, or seemingly trying to help you and tell you how to create here in that particular dimension? What does that serve? Why are they trying to show us that, Jay?
Well, again, I think it's sort of what Jacques Vallée talks about in his UFO books, that there's this other, and this other is trying to direct us onto a path to go for possibly their own benefit, but
Mhm.
also our benefit. And my experience with the machine elves was almost comical. I was coming through this passage, and they all gathered in front of me, and they all had this like green, I don't know, protoplasm or something in their hands, and they started throwing it at me, and they're hitting me with it, and I was getting hit like this green slime, and I was like, "Why are you doing this to me?" And they said, "You're trying to get through the time passage." And I said, what do you mean?" I said, "Yeah, you see that tunnel there? That's the time passage. You're not allowed to go in there. And we know that you want to go in there, and we're not going to let you go in there." And I said, "Why not? I want to see what's going on in the future and the past and all that." He goes, "You're not allowed." Of course, they sound like this. "You're not allowed." Sort of like Terence McKenna's voice. And so
Right.
I just broke out laughing at these guys, and they wouldn't let me pass. But yeah, they do help form reality. They kind of question you, like, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
Where are you going with your life? What's going on here? Why are you doing this?" And you walk away from the experience going, maybe I ought to think about what I'm doing here a little bit more.
I love that. And what seems to be a recurring theme, and most people who are having these experiences, Terence being one of them too, is that these elves are trying to impart this knowledge of how to do what they do. And they're very
Yes.
ecstatic about, you can do it, you just do it, right? And so I thought that was interesting. And I wanted to bring that into the mix. So let me share a bit of my experience. So
Yeah.
Sarah had bought some mushrooms maybe a year ago. Just she's going to do her nails at some nail salon, and she saw this new store just open, shrooms or something like that. And she says, "Huh, that's interesting." So she walks in there and she tells the attendant, "I want to have like a deep spiritual kind of experience with my husband. Which one do you recommend?" Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff on the shelf. And the lady's like, "Well, if you wanted this and that, like this one will do this." And she's going through the whole process. And she says, "This is the one for you." So we had the daddy long legs of this particular psilocybin mushroom component. And so she bought it, but we never used it. We had it for a whole year. I kind of forgot about it. And just so happened this spring, or just before the spring, we were still in the winter time here. Sarah and I were supposed to go to a movie, and we were snowed out. It snowed so much that we couldn't do anything that night. And it came to my mind, "Hey, didn't you buy mushrooms a while back? Maybe we should do that." And she's like, "Yeah, I wonder where those went." So anyway, she finds the mushroom, and then I kind of got cold feet. I'm like, "Well, fuck, we've never done this. Like, what's gonna happen? Like, I don't know how to do this." So I type up Cliff High in my messenger. I'm like, "Hey, Cliff, Sarah and I are about to try mushrooms. So what do I need to know?" He says, "Dude, hold on." So anyways, he gives me this list of stuff I need to know, and he's talking about all these best practices and all that stuff. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm gonna have fun. And Cliff is like super fucking ecstatic. He's like, dude, you're gonna have the trip of your life. You're gonna have fun. I wish I was there with you. Blah blah blah. But he still gave me some of the warnings I needed to know about. Right. So I'm like, okay. Unlike Terence McKenna, and I hadn't heard that a portion at the time, Terence is like, no, I want to do it alone at dark to receive the messages that the plant, or in this case, the mechanical elves want to give me. For us, it was more about creating like an extra sensory kind of environment and experience that Sarah and I were going to live together. So we brought in Alien's amazing botanical soaps with all the fragrances, colorful things in our room. And I had the bright idea. I'm like, let's listen to the Led Zeppelin soundtrack. So holy fuck. So anyways, so we take our doses, and I think the first dose, we did 2 trips that night. We were so like having fun with that we jumped into the second one right after that one. So the first one was about 4 hours. And anyway, so we took, I think it was 2.5 grams each. So not a heroic dose. It was just kind of like handshake. What's going on here? Can we handle this type of thing? Right. But as soon as I started, I got these amazing, like, it took me like a minute or two. And I was like, Sarah was still talking to me like, oh, I don't feel anything. I don't see it. I'm like, you don't see this? Like, it's fucking nuts. Like, I was there like right away. And within like a minute or two, like Led Zeppelin is singing in the background. What's his name? The singer of Led Zeppelin.
Robert Plant.
Plant, right? And his voice and the notes of his voice were translating into this matrix I was seeing, and his voices came alive, like the notes, and they became like characters, and they were dancing. I'm like, is this even real? Like, I was so tripped within the first 2 minutes, and then I was so down. Like I never felt that heavy in my life. I was like plastered to the couch. I couldn't have moved a finger, done anything after that. And then it was this onrush of information, and what could, for lack of better terms, could be described as a kaleidoscope of like weird ass shit. Like, what is that? And I was just like, like, what was the word? Choking on all of the information coming in, but just like in amazement, so much that my eyes were like crying, even though my eyes were closed and I was watching this whole movie play out. So to that note, I want to play a small clip from Terence McKenna, who explained what he was seeing. And then it's only when I heard his explanation could I now verbally explain it myself a couple of months later. So let me play this clip from Terence. I'm going to go to this slide here. Hold on. This one here. Okay, I'll just refresh, make sure I'm at the right time slot. There you go. Okay, let's play this.
Is DMT dangerous? It sounds so crazy. Is it dangerous? The answer is only if you fear death by astonishment. Remember how you laughed when this possibility was raised, and a moment will come that will wipe the smile right off your face. And this death by astonishment thing, well, one thing about it, I mean, let me say a little bit more about it. One thing that endears DMT to me is, I like to say, it doesn't affect your mind. It doesn't seem to affect your mind. In other words, you don't change under the influence of DMT. You don't become a kinder, gentler person. You don't sink into, you know, a line of drool from one corner of your mouth as you sit there twitching. You don't change. What happens is the world is completely replaced. Instantly, 100%, it's all gone. And what is put in its place, not one iota of what is put in its place was taken from this world. So it's a 100% reality channel switch. They don't even retain three-dimensional space and linear time. It's not like you go to an exotic place, Morocco or New Guinea. It's like reality is swapped out for something else. And when you try to say what it is, you realize that language has evolved in this world, and it can serve no other. Or it takes years of practice. So what you're looking at is literally the unspeakable.
Yeah, I'll stop that there. So, death by astonishment. I'm like, okay, that for me, that was the description of my first trip. I was astonished completely by what I saw, what I felt, what I heard, and the sheer volume of data that came through in that little amount of time. You said your DMT trip, so I was doing psilocybin. Your DMT trip was 5 minutes and it felt like 5 hours or 50 hours, you said. Similar to me, it felt like a lifetime of information had just been crammed into me. Kind of like that movie, Paul. You know, the alien when he touches the person on the forehead and they go, wow, kind of like that. So speak to that a little bit here too, this death by astonishment. How was your first reaction to that? Because you said it took you a week or so. For me, it was the same thing. I could not function for a week. I had all these weird things happening, similar to yours as well. I just couldn't reintegrate in my normal world for about a week. So it took me a while to reintegrate. And even when I did, I was having trouble speaking. And Cliff says, oh, that's normal. It fucked up your like language channel. Like new things are connected, new pathways, and it's going to take you a while to rejigger all that. But speak about this death by astonishment. Everybody laughed when they heard that. But I'm like, isn't that exactly what it is? It's a completely reset of your reality to a different place that you can't even explain. Jay?
Yeah, it's, trying to explain the psychedelic experience to a person who hasn't had one is like trying to explain sex to a eunuch. It's pretty much impossible. So you can't even really tell them. But what it really is like, it's like a 2-hour movie every minute, right? And you're getting so much stuff coming in that you are unsure what is really going on. But what you want to do is take a long pause after your psychedelic experience and examine what you went through so that you understand and piecemeal it out. And I even got to the point where I would do a heroic dose with a tape recorder. And I would just have it going and I would just be talking and tell myself in the future what it was I was seeing. And so shamans in like ancient cultures, I had a long experience with the Siberian shamans who have a particular mushroom that they take. They tell you that the mushroom, that if you're dealing with someone sick, that the mushroom will tell you what to do, where they're sick and what's going on and how to solve it. So there are real practical functions going on here. It's fun to take mushrooms and have your experience and all that, but at a certain point you have to approach mushrooms and psychedelics with this idea, I have to bring this knowledge back. And
what can you teach me? What do you want to teach me? Yeah.
Exactly. And you have to be open to it. So, the first time that I began talking to the voice inside the mushroom, I started asking questions and it was giving me answers, clear answers that weren't me. It wasn't my voice talking in my head. I asked it real questions. I asked it, is there Illuminati? Is there, what is the climate change? What is going on? And every answer that it gave me, and this is a long time ago that I did this, 40 years ago, every answer that it gave me turned out to be true. Every answer.
And this was an English voice. As Terence says, it's like, oh, the mushroom will pull up a chair and sit next to you and answer all of your questions in English. And it's not you talking. Something else is talking.
Very friendly. Yeah. And nice to you and knows when you start getting anxiety and says, calm down, take a deep breath. We're here to talk. Don't get upset. And, and frankly, the voice inside the mushroom has become one of my best friends and has helped me with my career and my filmmaking and all of it. And when I need to, when I reach a creative end and I'm kind of drained out, then I'll do a mushroom trip and I will become completely revived. And I did that before I'm doing my new series, The Invisible Universe, about a year ago. I was I'd done JFK and Clockwork Shining, and I was kind of burned out from the whole experience. And I took not 5 grams, like 3 grams, and went outside in nature at sunset. And it said, you got to do this film, this series, and it was a voice that clearly was telling me it, and people say, oh, you must be out of your mind, schizophrenic, you're hearing voices and everything, but it wasn't my voice. It was a completely different voice. It never used the same language that I would use. It didn't describe things the way that I would describe. It described them much better than I would describe them, much more clear. And I couldn't repeat back anything that it told me except for a feeling that I got from it. And again, and I wish Terence was around today to see this world and maybe give us a hint as to what was going on. But if we begin a conscious revival of shamanic psychedelic use, coupled with AI and the incredibly powerful tools that we are getting right now at this point in time, I would say that we could actually change the human race within a generation.
I think that's very apropos, Jay. For me, okay, so let's go back a little bit to the music first. I want to share this with you. So for me, the music, it was like I was suddenly inside the music. Like I was the speaker that was playing in my room. And to me, I was like, oh my God, because somebody said, oh my God, now I have to re-listen to Led Zeppelin. I'm like, I understood at that point that most of the Led Zeppelin soundtrack was recorded in that dimension, because it makes more sense there than here. It's amazing here. Like, it's absolutely amazing. But over there, it made even more sense. So it told me, like, okay, there was a bridge there between that dimension and here. And that has its own reality in a sense here. It gave it some texture to it. For me, I found that the sheer amount of information, because I did it twice on that same night, so 2 4-hour trips, both of them just as powerful. I would say love, bliss, and joy. And this, now listening to Terence, astonishment is what I got. It was like, can you imagine? I'm 50 something, and it's the first time I realized that there's something completely outside of my field of experience, and it's just separated by this thin veil. It's like, unzipping, and then suddenly I had the rest of the universe to me. And I found my biggest first conclusion coming out of that was I always felt that we were eternal souls, and that you couldn't destroy the who I am. Yes, the body, yes, but not the essence of who I was. And that trip solidified that in me forever, and it gave me a sense of calm that I never had once before in my life.
Well, you know that mushrooms have been proven to cure depression permanently.
On top of that, too, yeah.
So that's what happens. You enter the experience with your life experience, and a lot of it's really dark and all that, from all the lies and all the violence and everything that we have to experience. And then you enter into the mushroom trip, and you see the Hall of the Mountain King. You are there in Lord of the Rings. You are there in this incredible paradisical place, which is fantastic and unbelievable. And when you come back to the mundane reality, all you can think about is, wow, what was that? Was that real? And yes, it is real. It's completely real. It's a completely trans-dimensional experience put on by the mushrooms or the psychedelics. And, so I can't tell you how many people that you would know, that if I named their names, you would know who I'm talking about, who were mundane, normal people who one day decided, usually in their 20s, to take psychedelics and became incredible researchers, incredible speakers, incredible artists, incredible musicians. I know them. They've told me their stories.
Right.
They will tell you that it was a psychedelic experience that changed them into from what they were to what they became, and that they are forever grateful for the experience. And I'm telling you, literally hundreds of people I've asked this, and they've all said it yes. So, I regard it. What did I forget who it was who said it? I know it wasn't Terence, but they said that the psychedelic is the telescope of psychology. In other words, what the telescope did to astronomy, psychedelics do the same thing to psychology.
Right.
And now that they're legal, at least here in Colorado, they're legal. Mushrooms are. I expect to see some pretty dramatic changes coming here in society as we once again embrace the whole power of the psychedelic. And yeah, death by astonishment. That's what it is. You come away and you've seen things that your eyes have never seen, and you hear things that your ears have never heard.
Right.
And yeah, I'll tell you, one time I took a heroic dose of mushrooms, and I had a really incredible sound system, and I put on Bach and all the way up, all the way to 10. And I mean, it was a religious experience. It really was. I was like literally crying from the experience of the emotion of hearing this music. And sure, Led Zeppelin. I don't know if I could take Led Zeppelin under
Dude, I still trip when I hear Led Zeppelin play now. Months later, it brings me back. And sometimes, like if it's playing in the car, I turn it off right away because I don't want to go to trip while I'm driving.
Yes, you get a recurrent mushroom experience. Yes.
Yeah, I get those like kaleidoscopes right away back in my head. I'm like, whoa, okay, no, I'm driving. I can't do this right now. Man, it's been like such a wild ride, and I know I'm still decoding this. And I was having talks with Cliff about this. A few people are saying, "Hey, let's do a show." I asked him about this too, if he can join us tonight, but he's got some issue putting, I think, his Wi-Fi in his new studio where he is. But maybe he'll do another video on that on his Substack. So check him out. But yeah, I'd like to have him on the show to talk about his too. But yeah, the whole experience to me became an exercise in letting be and patience of all the information that was dropped also. So I feel like I've been decoding that slowly but surely, integrating that slowly but surely. I know that my worldview has changed. I feel it. I know that my language and processor centers have changed also. I feel that also when I'm doing live shows and all that stuff. I feel like there was a shift in me, and I'm struggling still. It's funny. I'll give you this analogy. You remember when what's that great golfer, Tiger Woods? You know, he was doing super amazing. Like he had all these great records, and then he's like, "Yeah, but I want to correct something, so I have to relearn my swing." And then he relearned the correct way to do his swing, and then he was horrible for a while until he became better. I feel kind of like that. That I'm still kind of like, I used to be able to do more things at the same time, multitask, and now I'm still struggling because I'm doing the multitask, and then there's like 10 additional layers that I see, feel, but I don't quite connect yet to what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking things. And I'm having still to readjust this. And this is months later. So I don't know where that is going, but I think it has something to do with this geometry, and this telepathic medium of information. Because again, when we are live here, I know for a fact there's something happening. We're creating this field where people are interacting with us too, and they're touching us, not just by the live chat, they're texting in the chat, but the way they're thinking, we're receiving those wavelengths, and we're part of this soup of information somehow. And I think that since my DMT trip, I'm a little bit more sensitive, and it's kind of tripping me up because now it's like there's too many voices in my head compared to. Does that make sense the way I'm explaining it?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I had to quit. When I started at Guy, I had to quit taking psychedelics because I could not function in the corporate environment in that, 8, 10, 12-hour day grind and keep the sensitivity that the psychedelics had given me. And so I kind of had to push all that back to the back burner while I was doing it. And then when I finally retired, I got back into psychedelic with a vengeance. And now, so yeah, you develop this incredibly sensitive view of the world. And there's two kinds of way to look at the world. There's perception and perspective. And perception is, how you lived your life and how you see the world is because what's happened to you and all that. Perspective is you being able to get into the other guy's head and see how he sees the world or she sees the world. Right. And mushrooms teach you that. The psychedelics teach you that. And so I was very successful in the corporate world because I wasn't doing perception, I was doing perspective. So I'd hear my boss or somebody I was working with tell me what they thought, and then I would see it from their point of view. And I truly, truly believe it was the mushroom that gave me that superpower. And then I would say, oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying this and that. And they go, oh, you do see what I'm saying. And instead of talking for my own, I was raised Catholic and, I was against war and all the things that made me what I am. I dropped that. And I think that mushrooms do that. I think they teach us not compassion, because that's kind of a loose word. I don't really understand. Right. It's an intrinsic ability to understand what the other person wants and desires.
Well, the telepathic thing comes to it in the language, but it's more of a I am you and you are me.
Yeah.
That's the feeling it gets. And Jay, so the first trip, Sarah and I were in the living room, but on two separate couches going through an experiment. That's how we did the first one. The second one, we were together side by side in a spoon position. And that one, holy fuck. We melded into this ball of light, basically, and I was her, she was me for this trip. It's absolutely amazing. Again, the show's not long enough to explain all of that and what happened in that one. But it's just like, again, that feeling of, I get what you're saying here. It's more of an understanding that we were part of something bigger than the illusion of thinking that we are separate from everything else. And I think when that clicks, everything else you do in life, the way you treat yourself, the way you treat people, the way you interact with society changes by the very nature of you understanding that very fact. And Terence was a big proponent of this. He says, imagine if everybody can have that field of view. We wouldn't have the wars and the famine and people destroying the planet that we have today. We would understand how we're all connected and we would drop that illusion. And I think perhaps that's what officialdom is still worried about now. When you look at here, they've legalized pot, but they're engineering that pot. It's a GMO pot. Yes, I wouldn't recommend that at all. So it's kind of like they're still taking away that valid experience or modifying it somehow. And I don't trust that. Do you think that what we're seeing now by these universities, I want to end on this. You just mentioned about curing depression, and in some cases, Sylvia, who was on our show, she talked about using this also for PTSD. She was in the RCMP before, and she's using a lot of her skills now to help other RCMP members, JTF task force people also who suffered PTSD in warlike conditions, and having a lot of success with these drugs. And now we're seeing universities funding these types of studies right now. And to some extent, I'm excited about it. It'll push the envelope. There's this idea also of having a slow drip mechanism to deliver DMT now, as opposed to having this rocket ship ride in 10 hours. We might be able to engineer technology to have it last a little bit longer and smooth out the edges. I forget who said that on Joe Rogan, but a lot of research is being put into it. I'm happy on one hand, but I'm a little bit paranoid on the other hand that might be co-opted and maybe bioengineered in a way to steal from us part of that experience that is the DMT or the mechanical elves here, who are truly trying to tell us something for our highest good. What do you think about that? And what are the cautionary tales you would share with the audience there?
Well, I think that I would not buy commercial marijuana or mushrooms. Mm-hmm. You have to grow them yourself, especially the mushrooms. That's what I do. And you can't trust it. It's going to be weaponized. So I would not go out and buy marijuana or mushrooms from commercial dealers anymore at all. And I want to say one thing that I haven't said before.
Okay.
If you really want to have an experience, a really amazing experience, take 2.5 to 3 grams of mushrooms and do tantra with your loved one. That
Yeah.
is
So
indescribable. There's no word. It was Terrence that told me to do it first, by the way.
okay.
So he told me to do it, dude. Just do it. So I did it, and I was like, whoa.
So Cliff,
mind.
I can imagine. So Cliff told me the same thing, and so that's why that second trip was designed that way. But again on the second trip, I think it was close to 3 grams. But that one, and Cliff said, yeah, it depends on the strain, depends on what you had in your stomach, depends if on your propensity, and as you said, you're swimming in water because maybe you're more adept at that particular field than other people. So it all depends on your physiology, I guess, your spirituality, all that stuff, right? And so for me, it was like a heroic dose again on the second time, to the point where I couldn't lift a finger even if I wanted to get into a tantra position. I was just completely overtaken by the drug itself and what it was showing me.
The mushroom god determines it. I've taken 5 grams and had nothing happen. I've taken 1 gram and felt more than 5 grams.
Right.
Because the mushroom god determines where you are at, and then determines what it's going to do to you. So if you're kind of in a bad mood, or you had a bad day and you're trying to get this to get you into a good mood, it's going to say, nah, that's not allowed. Sorry. Yeah, you can't do that. And so, it's definitely a changeable experience depending on the mood and the method.
Yeah.
And also setting, by the way, we haven't talked about that, but if you're going to do this, make sure your house is clean. Make sure that, if you are going to play music, it's good music. I would recommend not doing music, at least at first, because you want to get the messages. But, put some flowers out, and, some nice lighting, and make it as wonderful as possible. And then after you're done, make yourself a really good dinner. Something that's very tasteful and good, because you're going to be drained and you're going to need that energy that you're going to get. So make it something that you really like, something that not sweet or bad for you, but something that's good for you, and something that will replenish your spent energy, but something also that tastes really good. Because believe me, coming post off a heroic dose, food tastes 10 times better than it does in normal life. It's like music.
So I agree with you on creating that space. Cliff had told me the same thing. So we had taken good care on creating that space, or that safe space, not safe space, but a playpen to where we had everything we needed. We didn't have to go far. We could support each other and all that, and have those extra sensories like the soaps, the smells, the colors, the music in our case, and all that. For me, though, I have to warn the audience members, I could not have eaten anything if I wanted to after that. I was not sick, but it completely destroyed my gut. The term I would say is liquefaction. Sorry for the details, folks. And I was 2-3 days having to rebuild to where I could eat after that. It completely messed me up.
I totally understand that. Yeah.
I think again, different doses or different strains will do different things to you. Ayahuasca, I've had a lot of people tell me, I haven't had ayahuasca yet, that they often have that vomiting experience, or perhaps coming out both sides when they get into just before their trips and all that. So that seems to be part of it. I wonder why. Is that more of a energetic purging of sorts, again, where the plant knows that in order for you to learn from this frequency, you have to purge some stuff, and that's coming out in physicality as the vomit and the shit? What's going on with that, Jay?
I think so. I think you're being purged. Terry used to say that it was like giving birth to yourself through your nose.
That's a good one too. I felt like I was coming unglued, and for the first time I realized, oh, that's what people mean. It's kind of like, like molecule by molecule, I was separating in that first 2 or 3 minutes of the trip. And I got worried when you said the voice, like felt my nervousness. I'm like, yes, I remember on the first trip I had gone so far, and I knew I was going far because it was like, I'm a fish in water, man, just give it to me. And I was like, it just felt light years away. And then at a certain point it dawned on me, do I know how to come back? Like, am I too far? Like, what the fuck? What did I do? I never even thought to hit the brake pedal at some point to check around, right? And then this voice came and it says, oh, no, don't worry. Here, we'll open your eyelid and you can see the room is still there. So it's kind of like I'm in this tunnel. Things are rushing by me, and they open a little window and I can see my living room. And right in front of my couch where I was laying down, there's this old painting that my grandfather gave me. It's like a fishing scene. And dude, the boats were like going like this on the water, and guys were fishing. I'm like, okay. So my living room is still there. I'm good. And then I continued going. But it kind of knew at that point that I had this nervousness about it. And it just showed me, do you want off the ramp? It's right here if you want to. It's okay. Or do you want to keep going? I'm like, okay, keep going. I'm cool. Any other?
Yeah. My first DMT experience, I came off of it, and my keep cool guy was in the other room. And I came out to my bedroom, and he had to show me my driver's license because I had no idea who I was.
Really?
Said, You're Jay Weidner. That's your picture there. And I'm like, whoa.
Who the fuck is that?
Really? I'm one of those?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
At the end of that first trip too, as we were coming back or coming down, as Terence calls it too, like we opened our eyes, and at this point it's completely dark. It's like 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. The first, it was 11 till 3, the first trip. And so it's 3 a.m. It's completely dark, but yet it was like somebody turned on the light in our living room. I'm like, how can it be so bright? It's like, I could see everything. I'm like, but no, all the lights are closed. How is this possible? So that extra sensory, I could just imagine now, having gone to taste food, how that would have been absolutely amazing. All your sights were like, oh my God.
Yeah, you
Anyways.
can see the secret plasma universe on psychedelics. That's what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing the real universe as it really is that you can't see in your normal life.
Well, yeah. So, okay, my realization, okay, I'm more than this meat sack, and I know this now. Nobody can ever change it. I have that deep now inner knowing through my own experience. And that's what Terence was saying in a lot of his videos. The state now somehow has worked really hard to negate your personal experiences. You're not allowed to walk in the parks. You're not allowed to have DMT. You're not allowed to do this anymore. You have to ask permission, blah, blah, blah. Your experience is what creates that knowing and that participation in this reality. And we are far removed from it because of this nanny state that we have. And so me having that experience told me that. But it also told me that, whoa, that's real. What's that song? Life is but a dream. I'm like, this is the dream, and that's the real shit out there. That's what I came out with.
That's it. You got it. That's what psychedelics teach you. That this reality is 1% of reality, and the other 99% is completely invisible to us unless we look at it. And like we're just this tiny little thing in the giant ocean, and we're all connected though. That's the other thing it does teach you, which I'm all forgiving. I will never forget that psychedelics taught me that I am part of the whole entire universe.
Yeah. It's a profound experience for me. Guys, thank you for listening to me share that. And again, I've been reluctant for many months to even do the show and talk about it, simply because, as Terence says, it's like, it's speaking the unimaginable, the unthinkable, the unknowable. Like it's very hard. It's like, how do you describe to a person what an orgasm is when they've never had an orgasm? You're like, the words don't really, do it justice, right?
No,
So
can't explain it.
No,
it's ineffable is what they call it.
Right. That's a good point. Jay, you seem excited too, and I'm eager to get maybe more out of you. Is there anything else, any other experience in there, good or bad, that you think is important to share with the audience here tonight about some of your experiences here, either on the LSD, on the mushrooms, or DMT? What would you share? What do you think is critical for this frequency bandwidth we're creating tonight?
I would say that my experience, which is extensive, is I would stay away from synthetic psychedelics, LSD and DMT, and I would go with ayahuasca and mushrooms. And there's the organic light that you see when you're on psychedelics is much more pervasive on natural psychedelics than on synthetic psychedelics. And honestly, one of the reasons that I'm into it is because I like the hallucinations. I'm fascinated by them. And I believe the natural psychedelics give you a much more interesting experience.
I'm triggered by that word because I've heard other people describe it that way, but having had the experience, and I know this is probably a lack of vocabulary into how to describe that world, but is it a hallucination or is it just that you're now seeing the reality that you're perceiving, or that the shrinks out there? Oh, he's just hallucinating. There's nothing there. And I want to caution people to use that word, because that implies that perhaps it's not actually there or not actually real. Would you
No, it's
correct
real.
that word? Yeah.
It's real. It's real. The hallucinations are the veil from the other universe being separated. And yeah, we call them hallucinations, but they're not. They're very real. And you get real information. So how can you come back from an experience with information you didn't have before the experience, right?
Mhm.
So there has to be that the information is real. Now, whoever told you that experience wants you to understand that. So yeah, it's not an this is probably more likely the dream.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that was my realization. Not that probably that it actually is. Like when you think of all the limitations here in 3D, and as I was watching Cliff labor on how to explain the laws of attraction or assumption and how to create this reality, I'm like, dude, a lot easier on the other side and way more complex. Like, think about this. Cliff again brings these notions of complexity. We're entering these worlds of complexity. Terence was talking about this stuff too, that we were going to hit this kind of end of time as we know it. And I think we're there. And I think what the mechanical elves are doing there on the other side is exactly that. You can do it. You can do it. Look at this. Look at me. Look at this. You can do it. They're so excited for us. And there's this feeling of love too that I was surprised to see there. I had two figures that came in that kind of looked, that would have been, as best described, maybe as grays. They were nonchalant. They peeked into my stream. They kind of looked. I looked at them. They looked at me, and I looked at them. And then I was looking at all the information. I'm like, yeah, you guys are cool, but I'm more interested in this. And I just kept going. And that was the gist of those guys. And I didn't see more. But some people do have negative experiences there as well. Can you just maybe touch on that before we go? Some of those negative experiences. Joe Rogan talked about that too, that it could fuck up people who have predispositions to psychological issues that perhaps are, what's the word? Yeah, I forget the other word, but some of those dangers. Can we talk about it here too? Because you and I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we wanted to make sure that we're not glorifying it in any way, and that we're not suggesting that anybody try this. It's very much a buyer beware here, and don't try this at home type of situation. So let's talk about some of those dangers and where this is not actually helpful for some portion of humanity, Jay.
Well, if you've got a lot of anxiety in your normal life, and you're worrying all the time, and you can't sleep, and you have a lot of psychological disturbances, you probably shouldn't be taking them. You want to take them in the brightest frame of mind that you can. And if you have that darkness, I highly recommend that you don't do it. Wait until you're over your depression, because it will show the demons to you. It definitely will. And that helps a lot of people, actually. It helped me to see my demons. But some people don't want to see their demons, or don't want to admit that they have the demons. And so that becomes a very disconcerting experience. So again, meditate, get into a really good frame of mind, and before you do it. And again, have someone that loves you nearby while you're doing the very first experience, so that you can at least feel that love during the experience. And and if you're going into a bad place, turn on some music, or some kind of diversion that will take you away from that, because sometimes the dark place that you go in psychedelics can be a little bit overwhelming.
Right. Somebody's saying, do the elves surf, JC? Well, kind of, because it's all fluid. Like it's kind of weird how to explain it. It's not like they're on a surfboard on water, but everything is like, I call it this torrent or this river of time and information, and it's coming at you. It's kind of like in Star Trek, when they go to warp speed, the visual effect, that added to all this complexity, the geometry and all the stuff. And like I said, the music, just creating the environment, all of the notes coming alive as characters, creating other characters. I was just like, what? Completely blown away. Oh my God. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching tonight. We'll try to do a part 2 of this because I have more on the deck that we wanted to share, more from the not the esoteric part, but the evolutionary mind part. Again, I wanted to come into this conversation with Jay and with Penny Kelly last week, just to bring this to people's awareness to understand that we are at this critical juncture for humanity, and we are, regardless of whether we see it or not, in that not just the evolutionary process, but as Terence calls it, the birthing canal of a new humanity, right?
That's
And we need all the help we can get through that birthing canal and make sure that we're running and going on the other side of it for the better good of humanity, as opposed to this controlling matrix we found ourselves in. And he says often that perhaps if we did have more access to psychedelics over the last number of years, we wouldn't have the problems that we have now, right? So there are solutions to all of those problems, and they become self-evident just by the transformationary nature of DMT and psilocybin and what it does to you on a human perspective, to understand that you're not separate from everything else. It does dissolve that illusion very, very quickly. And I think that's very critical. And just having access to this conversation and thinking about that in that way, I hope the audience is sharing with us now and at least starting to think about these concepts, because we do these shows all day long, Jay, where we look at all the bad news and we're decoding what Trump said and what Zelensky said and blah, blah, blah. And to some extent, there's value in that to make sure that we don't get into harm's way, for example, or that maybe we can game the system a little bit here to have a better position. But that only brings you so far. I want to bring the audience with great minds like Jay to, okay, what do we do next? What do we want? And I think using this telepathy and this information that the elves are wanting to share, it seems to be a lot better than all the mechanisms that we've tried to use to extricate ourselves from this matrix in the last number of decades as we became aware of it. So what would you say, Jay, to that effect there? How do we extricate ourselves from that? And why is it so important to have these conversations and to look at reality as a bigger whole than 99% here versus this limited hangout in this little bubble that we find ourselves here in 3D, Jay?
Well, first off, I highly recommend that everyone read the book. Came out about a year and a half ago called The Immortality Key. I forget the author's name. He's a Greek scholar, and it basically explains the history of psychedelics in the Western world, and that they've been around forever, and that we've been using them forever. He thinks that the communion sacrifice in the Catholic Church was originally a psychedelic exercise. Now that's it. I asked if he wanted I could interview him, but he never wrote me back. So he might be kind of a shy person. But he did go on Rogan with Graham Hancock, and it was a really good program about psychedelics and how the rediscovery of psychedelics can lead to the immortality of the human race. It's a really good book. I highly recommend it. And it's a young guy, not somebody out of my generation, somebody that's like in their early 30s and a very intelligent person. And he's never taken psychedelics, by the way. He just wrote about them because he didn't want them to mess with him while he was writing the book. So I highly recommend that. And then, I think that we need to create a system where elders initiate youngers through the use of psychedelics and heroic doses, and teach them, have like classes before they do it, so that they understand what they're seeing when they're in the experience. And that's really important.
There's a gentleman, I don't think it's that same name, but who's doing basically like a documentary. Oh, it's called The Strange Attractor, The Hallucinatory Life of Terence McKenna by Graham St. John. I think the book is going to be released in October. I've sent him a message to try to see if I can get him on the show to bring some of this. And Jay, you're more than welcome if you want to participate in that interview. That book as well, maybe I should reach out to Brian as well to see if we can bring him back on the show. I think it's these are the conversations we want to have, and I think they're very important. Thank you so much, Jay, for all of your wisdom and sharing your personal experience here tonight, because I know even for me, it's kind of like, I'm not a shy person by any means. I don't think you are either, but this is such a profound personal experience on many levels. On one hand, it's hard to share with people. And I think that because it takes so much time to integrate and to analyze what the fuck actually happened, that we're reluctant to talk about it. And three, finally, we kind of feel weird because I came from a world where, we had commercials when I was a kid. These are your brains on drugs. Don't do drugs. So there's this stigma attached. And of course, this is not a drug. We could do a whole other show on why it shouldn't be in the same category as all these other drugs. But there's a stigma attached to people who do psychedelics. And I think it's wrong personally at this point that stigma is still there. It's lifting right now, but it's still making it hard for people to want to share their stories. And so good on you, Jay, for coming on the show. I really appreciate sharing yours. Good on you in the chat also for sharing your experiences with the live members here tonight. Really appreciate that. Jay, you mentioned you were a little bit burnt out and you wanted to have a reboot. You did some mushrooms last October. What are you working on right now? And what's this new series that the audience can expect here coming out very soon?
It's called The Invisible Universe. I haven't got a subtitle yet. I've got the original edit done. Now we have to do the B-roll and the sound and everything. And it won't be done until the end of the year or maybe even later. And it's a great adjunct to what we're talking about tonight. And it will help you understand the universe that you can see when you do take psychedelics. And we talk about it in the show.
Really cool. Okay, so we're all of the same mindset. And for the audience members here who want to see more of your work, Jay, they can find you, of course, on your YouTube channel at Reality Check. You just interviewed a writer here on this Exorcist Decode just the other day. Anything coming up also that you want to point the attention to for the audience?
No, not really. I'm concentrating mostly on getting my series done, but I am going to be doing shows and stuff on Reality Check. You can also get all my films on Amazon and Gaia.com, and all my free writing is at jweidner.com.
There you go. And the links are in the description box below, guys, for the Clockwork Shining, if you haven't seen that, as well as JFKX here solving the crime of the century. Thank you so much for watching, guys, this evening. Thank you so much, Jay. Jay, stay on the line for just a moment here as I round out the show. Guys, if you like the show, please hit that like button, and please do leave us a comment. Let us know how we did, and we'll bring you more of this amazing information here moving forward. If you want to see more of these shows here this week, just go to beyondmystic.net and click on the schedule there for about 23 or 24 shows coming up here this week on Beyond Mystic. I love you guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.